Hello, friends. Night has already fallen, and the day was long and tiring. And now, it is time to rest. As always, I will tell you a kind legend that once took place in our beloved Middle-earth. So, settle in comfortably, gently close your eyes, and let our journey begin. The northern wind had a cruel voice that winter, a sound like knives drawn across stone. It came down from the mountains beyond the Etten moors and swept the high passes of the misty mountains, carrying with it whispers of things stirring in the far north. In Rivendell, where the air was softer and the fires burned bright, the wind's tale reached the ears of Gandalf the Grey. He sat before the hearth, staff resting across his knees, listening to Elrond's messengers who had returned from the wilds. Their cloaks were torn by briars and stiff with frost, and their words were heavy with unease. They spoke of strange tracks upon the snow, vast, clawed imprints, half frozen, yet deep as those left by trolls. They spoke, too, of riders glimpsed against the dawn sky, black shapes that moved with wings, though no horses could be seen below them. "The north is restless again," said Elrond, his brow darkened with thought. "Angmar's ruins lie silent, but something watches from their shadow. We had thought the Witch King's fall an ending. Perhaps it was only an interlude." Gandalf drew upon his pipe, sending a curl of smoke into the air, and said nothing for a long while. His eyes, half hidden by his hat, gleamed with a distant memory of dragons in the elder days, of cold fire and black wings. "If wings have returned to the north," he said at last, "then it is not the Witch King who commands them. Yet such things do not move without a master. The shadow lengthens, Elrond. I must see for myself what lies beyond the ice bay of Forochel." Elrond inclined his head, though concern shadowed his gaze. "Few have gone so far and returned. The snows of Forodwaith swallow even the hardiest. But if you go, take word to Dain Ironfoot. His scouts watch the passes near Gundabad. He will aid you if you ask." "I shall do so," Gandalf replied. "And if fortune favors us, this will prove no more than the mischief of frost spirits and wandering beasts." He did not believe that. Not truly. So it was that within 3 days, Gandalf set out from Rivendell, riding upon his great grey horse, Shadowfax. The road was long and bitter with cold. The lands between the misty mountains and the grey mountains lay silent and still, save for the howl of wolves and the rush of hidden streams beneath the snow. When at last the wizard came to the foothills of the grey mountains, he found the dwarves of the Iron Hills already troubled. Their outposts had seen movements by night, orc bands gathering near Mount Gundabad, though their banners were strange and unmarked by Sauron's eye. Their chieftains spoke of serving the Winged Lord, and they bore with them shards of ice that did not melt even by firelight. Gandalf listened to the dwarf warden, a broad-shouldered fellow named Dainir, and his heart grew heavy. "The Winged Lord," he murmured. "That name has not been heard since the Elder Days. I fear we have not yet seen the last of the fire drakes." Dainir spat into the snow. "Then we must drive them back into the mountains, ere they bring ruin to our halls as Smaug once did." "Patience, my good dwarf," said Gandalf. "Bravery alone will not conquer fire, nor cunning alone the frost. We must know what we face." He asked for a small company to guide him northward, and Dainir agreed to go himself, bringing with him 2 of his kin. Along the way, they were joined by a tall man in a weather-stained cloak, one of the Dunedain of the north. He named himself Belegorn, a ranger whose kin had long kept watch over the remnants of Angmar. Together, they pressed on into the desolate lands, where the northern lights flickered like green fire across the heavens. The further they went, the more the world seemed to sleep under a spell of cold. At night, Gandalf would stand apart from the camp and gaze into the dark beyond their fires. Sometimes, faintly, he would hear the sound of wings, slow and heavy, far above the clouds. Once, when he looked up, he thought he saw a shape against the stars, vast and pale, gliding northward. But when he blinked, it was gone. "Rivangar," whispered Belagorn one night, when Gandalf told him what he had seen. "That is the name old tales give to the Pale One, the ice drake of the north. It was said he fell into the deeps beneath the mountains ages ago, broken in battle with the dragons of Morgoth. Yet if he stirs again, if he stirs," said Gandalf quietly, "then fire and death shall follow him. But I mean to learn the truth of it, while there is yet time." The company journeyed on through frozen valleys, following the tracks of orcs, until they came to a narrow gorge where the snow lay trampled and blackened. There they found the remains of a camp, charred timbers, half-burned corpses, and the smell of ash. The dwarves knelt to study the ground, their faces grim. "This was no mere fire," said Daenir. "See how the stones themselves are cracked, and the snow turned to glass. Dragonfire did this." Gandalf nodded, his eyes on the horizon, where faintly he could see smoke curling upward from beyond the next ridge. "Then we are closer to our answer than I had hoped. Come, my friends. The wings over the north have not flown unseen, and before this winter ends, we shall know who commands them." And so the grey pilgrim pressed on into the white wilderness, the wind rising behind him like a song of ancient dread. The days that followed were harsh beyond measure. Snow fell ceaselessly, fine as ash and bitter as salt. The north seemed to test them, as though the mountains themselves wished to turn them back. Yet Gandalf's purpose burned steady, and the fire of it warmed even the hearts of the dwarves who trudged beside him. They climbed into the high passes where the wind shrieked like a living thing, and the peaks of the grey mountains loomed close as white walls. At times, the snow rose to their knees, and only Shadowfax's strength carried them through the drifts. Belagorn walked before the company, keen-eyed and silent, his hand upon the hilt of his sword. It was he who found the signs: broken arrows, discarded packs, and the black banners of orc warbands frozen into the ice. "Gundabad's spawn have been abroad in great number," he said grimly. "Yet these trails lead north, beyond their own holds. That is strange indeed." Gandalf stooped beside the tracks. "Strange, yes," he murmured. "They march at the bidding of another. See how they travel in ordered lines, not like raiders or wanderers. Something commands them, and something great." That night, they made camp in the lee of a cliff, where a small hollow shielded them from the wind. The dwarves built a low fire, feeding it with dry roots they had carried since their last outpost. Gandalf sat apart, his eyes half closed, and began to hum softly, an old song of the West, sung long before the First Age had ended. It was a song to keep away the dark things of the cold. When the last light faded from the sky, Belagorn rose and came to him. "You do not rest," the ranger said. "What troubles you?" "The air," Gandalf answered quietly. "It tastes of fire, and yet the cold grows deeper." He turned his gaze northward, and even as he spoke, a faint tremor shook the earth beneath them. The fire sputtered. The dwarves looked up in alarm. Then there came a sound, distant but unmistakable. The beating of vast wings, slow and thunderous, echoing through the mountains. Belagorn drew his sword, though there was nothing to see in the darkness. "He comes," he whispered. "The Pale One." For a long moment, the company held their breath. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the sound faded. The wind howled again, and the night was empty. At dawn, the mountains were veiled in mist. They set out once more, following the tracks northward. The snow here was marked by great furrows, as though heavy bodies had dragged themselves across it. Dynir bent low to examine them, and rose with a curse. "Drakes indeed," he growled. "By Mahol, I can smell their stench." Before noon, the company reached the edge of a frozen valley. Below them stretched a vast basin filled with cracked ice and scattered boulders. In its midst stood a ruin, the remains of a fortress older than memory, its towers broken and black. "Khandum," Belegorn said in a low voice, "the stronghold of the Witch King." Even the dwarves fell silent. The place seemed steeped in old malice. Frost hung upon the stones like cobwebs, and the wind that passed through the ruins carried faint whispers like voices long dead. Gandalf's eyes gleamed beneath his hood. "If any power stirs again in the north, it will be here," he said. "Stay close, but be ready. We go down." They descended carefully, moving between ridges of ice and broken walls. The ground beneath their boots felt treacherous, hollow in places, as though great caverns lay beneath. When they reached the valley floor, the wind died away, leaving a silence so deep that even their breathing seemed loud. At the heart of the ruins stood a vast archway, half buried in snow. Strange runes were carved upon its lintel, marks of warding and old sorcery, though much of it had been marred by claw and flame. Gandalf lifted his staff, and the tip shone with a pale light. "This door has been opened," he said softly. "And not long ago." Belegorn moved closer, his sword gleaming faintly in the glow. "Do we enter?" Gandalf's answer was a whisper. "We must." Inside, the passage was dark as pitch. The air was thick with frost and the faint smell of sulphur. Their light flickered upon walls of black stone, scarred and melted, as if by fire. The corridor wound downward, twisting through the earth until it opened into a wide cavern. There, upon the floor, lay the bones of many creatures, orcs, goblins, even men, all scorched and broken. And in the center of that hall, half buried in ice, was something vast and terrible, the skull of a dragon. Its size was greater than any Gandalf had ever seen. Fangs as long as swords jutted from its jaws, and from the hollow of its skull gleamed a faint blue light, like fire trapped within frozen glass. "By Durin's beard," whispered Dynir. "What manner of beast is this?" Gandalf approached slowly. "It is not dead," he said. "Not fully. Its spirit lingers, bound by some power." He touched the ice with the tip of his staff, and the blue light flared. A low rumble filled the chamber, and a gust of freezing air burst forth. The ice cracked. "Back!" cried Gandalf. The dwarves stumbled away just as a fissure split the ground. From the darkness below came a roar, deep, furious, and alive. The dragon's skull trembled, and the blue fire leapt within its sockets like living flame. Belegorn seized Gandalf's arm. "You have woken it!" "Nay," said the wizard grimly. "It was already waking." The ground heaved beneath them. Shards of ice fell from the ceiling, and the ruin shook as if in anger. Gandalf raised his staff high, and light blazed forth, driving back the darkness. Through the rising mist they saw it then, the shadow of a vast form moving beneath the ice, long and coiled, its wings unfurling with a sound like thunder. A single eye opened, burning pale as a winter moon. "Hrivangar," Gandalf whispered. "The Pale One lives." They fled from the cavern as the creature's roar followed them, shaking the very mountains. The ice split open behind them, and gouts of white flame spewed forth, freezing everything it touched. They barely reached the open air before the ground collapsed in a thunderous crash. From the depths below, the dragon's head rose, vast and gleaming, its scales like silvered mail, its breath a storm of frost. Hrivangar spread his wings, each as broad as a great hall, and his voice rolled through the valley. "Who wakes me from my long sleep?" Gandalf stood firm, though his cloak whipped in the wind, and his staff shone like a star. "I am Gandalf the Grey," he called, "servant of the secret fire. I come to learn what evil stirs in the north, and to end it." The dragon's laughter was cold as ice breaking upon stone. "Then learn this, Grey Wanderer. The north has no master but death, and I am its winged herald." The wind rose, the snow swirled in great spirals about them. The dwarves drew their axes. Belegorn raised his sword. "Run if you must," said Gandalf softly, "but this battle will not be won by fear." And as Hrivangar's wings lifted and the sky darkened with frost, the wizard raised his staff high, and fire met ice beneath the frozen heavens. Fire and frost clashed upon the valley floor, and the mountains trembled with the thunder of it. Gandalf's staff blazed like a beacon, its white fire meeting the blue-white flame of the dragon's breath. The air burst in waves of steam that rolled down the slopes like storm clouds, and the frozen river beneath their feet shattered into shards of glass. Hrivangar's roar split the sky. He rose upon wings vast as ships' sails, his scales glittering like cold silver. Ice trailed from his pinions, and where it fell, stone froze solid, and trees turned to brittle glass. His eyes burned with ghostly fire, filled not merely with hunger, but with an ancient, cunning wrath. The dwarves scattered among the rocks, shouting curses in their deep tongue. Belegorn dragged Dynir behind a fallen pillar as another blast of icy breath swept across the ruin, turning the air itself to shards. Gandalf stood firm amid the chaos, his cloak whipped by wind and frost. "Back to the walls," he called. "He cannot take flight freely there." They fled toward the broken archways of Carn Dûm. Hrivangar swooped low, smashing through ruined towers in pursuit. His claws gouged the stone, his tail lashed like a living whip, sending boulders tumbling. Yet Gandalf's light dazzled him, forcing the drake to wheel upward once more. "By Mahal's hammer!" cried Dynir. "How are we to slay such a beast?" "With wisdom first," Gandalf answered, breathing hard. "Steel and courage will come after." They took refuge in a great hall that opened into the mountain's heart. There, Gandalf turned to the others. "He is not whole," he said. "Did you not see the frost upon his wings? His strength lies not in fire, as Smaug's did, but in death and cold. He was bound long ago by sorcery, the relic of Morgoth's own craft. Something has awakened him, and until we break that spell, he cannot die." Belegorn frowned. "Then we must find what binds him, before he finds us." The wizard nodded. "There will be a source, a talisman or shard of the old power that keeps his spirit tethered to this world. Search the depths. I will draw his wrath above." The dwarves protested, but Gandalf raised his hand. "I am not without means. Go now, and swiftly." They obeyed, vanishing into the dark tunnels beneath the ruin. Belegorn lingered a moment longer. "You will face him alone?" "For a time," said Gandalf. "But fear not. I do not fight without allies, seen or unseen." Then the wizard strode back into the storm. Hrivangar was circling above the fortress, his wings stirring whirlwinds of snow. He saw Gandalf below and descended with a bellowing roar that echoed for leagues. "Still you stand, old fool," the dragon hissed. "Do you think your flickering light can warm the heart of winter?" "I have seen older winters pass," Gandalf replied, "and older monsters fall." With that, he struck the ground with his staff. Lightning answered his call, searing through the clouds. The bolt struck Hrivangar's breast, and the drake reeled with a cry of fury. Yet when the smoke cleared, he was still aloft, wounded, but enraged beyond measure. "You meddle in the doom of ages," Hrivangar thundered. "You cannot slay what is already dead." He beat his wings, sending a gale of frozen wind that hurled Gandalf to his knees. Ice climbed up the wizard's cloak and beard, binding him fast. Still he rose, leaning upon his staff. "I can end what does not belong to this world," Gandalf said through gritted teeth. "And you, creature, do not belong." Far below, in the winding caverns, Dynir and his kin found a hidden vault deep under the ruins. The walls there gleamed with runes of iron and frost, and in the center stood an altar of black stone. Upon it lay a crystal, vast and cracked, glowing with the same blue fire that burned in Hrivangar's eyes. Belegorn approached it warily. "This must be it," he said, "the heart that binds him." Dynir hefted his axe. "Then let us break it." "Wait," said Belegorn. "Such a thing will not yield easily." Above them, the ground trembled again as Hrivangar descended. His voice echoed through the caverns like thunder. "You crawl in my tomb, thieves. The cold will claim you all." Gandalf, hearing the drake's cry, lifted his staff once more and shouted words of power in the tongue of the Valar. Flame leapt from the staff's head, swirling into a great ring of fire that encircled the dragon. Hrivangar bellowed in pain, his wings scorched by the light. "Now," thought Gandalf. In the vault below, the dwarves struck together, their axes falling upon the crystal. The first blow cracked it, the second sent splinters flying, but with the third, the crystal screamed, a sound like the wail of 1,000 storms, and blue fire burst outward, blinding them all. Hrivangar shrieked, his body twisting in agony. His wings faltered, his breath turned to steam, and frost melted from his scales. The spell was breaking. Gandalf seized the moment. He called again to the lightning, and this time the heavens obeyed. A pillar of white fire struck the dragon squarely upon his breast. Hrivangar's cry shook the mountains, then dwindled into silence. His vast body fell, crashing through the ruins, and lay still amid the snow. When the smoke cleared, Gandalf stood upon the battlements, leaning heavily on his staff. His beard and cloak were rimed with frost, and his breath came in clouds. Slowly, the others climbed up from the depths, faces pale and eyes wide. "Is it done?" asked Belegorn. "For now," said Gandalf. "The spell is broken, but not all evil dies when its body fails. Some shadows linger, and some find new masters." They stood in silence for a time, watching the pale dawn spread across the mountains. The dragon's corpse glimmered faintly in the light, already hardening into ice. Dynir spat into the snow. "Good riddance," he said gruffly. "May the North sleep again." "Sleep," Gandalf murmured, "but never forget." This was no chance awakening. Something called to him from afar, a whisper from the east, perhaps. There are powers moving still, powers that test the edges of the world's peace. Belegorn looked toward the horizon, where the first light touched the plains of Rudor. "Then our task is not ended." "No," said Gandalf softly. "It is only begun." That night they camped among the shattered ruins. The wind was calm now, and the stars shone clearly. Gandalf sat alone, gazing into the embers of the fire. He felt the weight of the long road still ahead. The road that led south, toward darker days and greater peril. But for that moment, the north was quiet, and the wings over its mountains were still. And though the wizard's heart was heavy with thought, he smiled faintly. For he knew this victory, though small, had bought the free peoples of Middle-earth a little more time before the shadow rose again. Far away, beyond the lands of Dale and the desolation of Smaug, the dark birds began to fly, southward, bearing tidings of what had passed, and in some deep place beneath the earth, unseen and patient, another eye stirred, one that had waited long for such news. The north had been tested, and Gandalf the Grey had stood against its might. But the true storm, he knew, was yet to come. And so, when morning broke and the pale light touched the snowbound peaks, Gandalf rose, mounted Shadowfax once more, and turned his gaze toward the south. The fire of his staff gleamed one last time upon the icy plain, like a star kindled at dawn. And then he was gone, leaving only the wind and the whisper of ancient wings behind. When dawn at last broke over the frozen realm of the north, the world seemed still again, as though the very mountains held their breath. The ruin of Carn Dum lay beneath a veil of mist and silence, its towers toppled and its halls choked with the smoke of shattered ice. Rivanga the Pale had fallen, and the cold fires that had burned in his hollow heart were quenched. Yet even as Gandalf stood upon the wind-swept height, the weariness of the long night heavy upon him, he felt no triumph. There was peace, yes, but uneasy and thin as a fragile shell. Beneath it, darker things moved. Shadowfax waited upon the ridge, his white mane glinting faintly in the pale light. The wizard laid a hand upon the horse's neck, speaking softly in the tongue of Rohan. "We have seen the worst of this winter's fury, old friend, but not the last of the storm. Still, we must go while the snows hold firm." Behind him, the dwarves and Belagorn labored among the wreckage, gathering what they could of their supplies. Smoke rose from their campfires, small feeble plumes against the vast northern sky. Dynir approached, his face still streaked with soot and frost. "He's gone for good, then?" the dwarf asked, jerking a thumb toward the frozen carcass of the drake. "No spark left in him?" Gandalf's eyes lingered on the ice-clad form below. "No," he said quietly. "His body is broken and his spirit scattered, but something greater than his will called him back to this world. Something that still endures. The chain that bound him was forged far from these mountains." "Forged where?" Belagorn asked. The wizard sighed. "In lands that lie beyond sight, in the deeps of shadow, where the name of Morgoth is yet remembered." The ranger's gaze darkened. "Then his master's servants still walk the earth." Gandalf gave a weary nod. Indeed, this was but one note in a greater song, a testing of strength, perhaps. The enemy watches, though not all his eyes are turned toward the north. For a long while, none spoke. The wind stirred, carrying the scent of snow and cold iron. Somewhere far off, a raven cried, a sound lonely and thin. By midday, the company was ready to depart. They had bound their packs, patched their torn cloaks, and buried the fallen orcs beneath the ice, though none offered them honor in death. The dragon's remains they left untouched. Already frost had sealed Rivanga in a tomb of glittering glass, his wings spread wide like those of a fallen god. They turned southward, following the ancient road that wound down from Angmar toward the lands of the Etenmoors. Their steps were slow and heavy, for exhaustion clung to them, and even Gandalf seemed drawn into silence. For 2 days they traveled thus, seeing no living thing save the circling carrion birds that haunted their path. On the 3rd evening, as they made camp beside a half-frozen stream, Belagorn returned from his watch with a troubled look. "There are tracks in the snow," he said. "Fresh ones, and not of beasts. Men, perhaps 20 or more, coming from the west. Men? Dynir grunted. There are no men in these lands, save the hill robbers and worse. Then we shall see which they are, said Gandalf, rising. He took up his staff and walked a little way from the fire. In the deepening dusk, he saw them. Faint shapes moving along the ridge, cloaked and hooded, silent as ghosts. When they drew nearer, the wizard raised his staff, and white light flared. The figures halted. Then one stepped forward, lowering his hood. It was a man, tall and lean, his garments of dark leather lined with fur. His eyes were pale grey, his beard touched with frost. "Hold your light, stranger," he said, in a voice rough with cold. "We mean no harm." "Who are you?" Gandalf asked. "Rangers of the North," the man replied, "of the house of Aranarth, son of Arvedui. We have watched these mountains since the days when Angmar fell." Belegorn came forward swiftly. "Then you are of my kin," he cried. "I am Belegorn, son of Barahir, warden of the Cold Fells." The other's face softened. "Then you walk in good company. I am Halros, captain of the Watchers. We saw the light upon the peaks 3 nights past, fire and thunder, and feared the North had awakened again." "It nearly did," Gandalf said. A drake, older than memory, was roused from his sleep. But he is gone now, thanks to brave hands and fortune's mercy. Halros frowned. "Then the tales were true. We found the signs of orcs fleeing south, their banners marked with strange sigils, wings of ice and shadow." "Servants of the same power," Gandalf replied. "You must keep watch still. If any bear that sign, they must not be allowed to gather again." Halros nodded gravely. "We will see to it. Yet you have done a great deed here, Mithrandir. Few now remember the courage of the old days, when such beasts walked freely." The wizard smiled faintly. "Courage never wholly vanishes, so long as there are hearts willing to face the dark." That night, they camped together, rangers and dwarves, side by side beneath the northern stars. They shared dried meat, hard bread, and the strong red ale of the Iron Hills, though little cheer came of it. For even in their victory, the company felt a shadow pressing upon them, an unease that would not fade. Before dawn, Gandalf rose and walked apart from the sleeping men. The land was vast and white under the first blush of morning, the air sharp as a blade. He looked north toward the mountains where the drake had fallen. There was no movement now, only stillness. Yet in that stillness, he felt the weight of unseen eyes. He spoke softly, as though to himself. "You test us, do you not? You send whispers into forgotten places to see who still listens. But I have heard you, and your servants will find no welcome here." The wind answered, faint and hollow. When he returned to camp, Shadowfax was saddled and ready. Belegorn and the dwarves stood waiting, their faces set with quiet resolve. "Where will you go now, Gandalf?" Belegorn asked. "South," said the wizard. "To Erebor, and thence to Dale. The North must be warned. Dain Ironfoot should know what evil has crept once more into his borders." "Will you not tarry a while?" Halros asked. "The snows are deep, and the roads treacherous." "I have ridden worse roads," Gandalf answered, a glimmer of humor in his eyes, "and time is ever short when shadows lengthen." He mounted Shadowfax, his cloak billowing like smoke in the wind. The others stood watching as he turned his horse toward the distant hills. "Farewell, Mithrandir," said Halros. "Should the north darken again, we will light the beacons of Arnor, and you will know." Gandalf inclined his head. "Then keep your fires ready, my friends. The night grows long." With that, he set his heels to Shadowfax's flanks, and the great horse leapt forward, swift as a gust of wind. The snow flew in plumes behind them, and soon The wizard was but a grey shadow upon the white horizon. Belagorn watched until he was gone, then turned back to the rangers. "He walks in storms where other men dare not tread," he said quietly. Dynir snorted, tightening his belt. "Aye, and leaves us with the tidying afterward." But there was no bitterness in his tone, only weary respect. And so Gandalf rode south once more, bearing the tale of what had passed beneath the wings of the North, a tale that few would ever hear in full, and fewer still believe. Yet the echo of that battle lingered in the cold air, carried by ravens and whispered by the wind across the empty wilds. For though the Pale One lay dead beneath his shroud of ice, the power that had stirred him was not ended. Far beyond the mountains, in the black lands where Barad-dûr brooded once more, a shadow smiled, unseen, patient, and certain of its hour. But the grey pilgrim rode on, unyielding as the dawn. Snow yet lingered in the valleys when Gandalf came at last to the foothills of the Grey Mountains. The long journey south had stripped him of rest, but not of purpose. His thoughts were full of what he had seen in the north, the pale fire, the dragon's roar echoing across the peaks, and the strange blue light that had burned like a will of its own. These memories clung to him, as frost clings to stone even when the sun has risen. He crossed the lands of the Beornings, where winter still clutched the woods in its iron grasp. The tall pines whispered overhead, and the air smelled of resin and cold earth. Gandalf was known there. He passed freely among them, though few words were spoken. The men of that land were wary folk, watchful, proud, and slow to trust tidings from afar. At the ford of the River Running, a company of Beornings met him. Their leader, a broad-shouldered man with eyes the color of storm clouds, hailed him. "Grey Wanderer," he called. "You come from the north, and the birds bear grim tales. What stirs beyond the mountains?" Gandalf reined in Shadowfax and regarded him gravely. "What you have heard is true enough. A drake has risen and fallen again, but his awakening was no chance thing. There are dark whispers in the cold, and orc bands that bear strange marks. Your borders are watched, but not by friendly eyes." The Beorning frowned. "Then it is as I feared. 2 of our hunters vanished last month near the high moors. We found only ice where they had made their fire, ice that burned the flesh to touch." The wizard's brow furrowed. The trace of Hrivangar's craft, perhaps, or of another who served him. "Keep your folk close to your halls, and trust not the peace of the snows. There are still claws beneath it." The man bowed his head. "We will heed your counsel, Mithrandir. The North owes you thanks." "Thanks are well enough," Gandalf said, "but vigilance will serve you better. Evil seldom dies. It sleeps and dreams." He pressed on, following the river eastward. The mountains fell away behind him, and the land grew softer, gentler, though the memory of winter was not yet gone. By the time he reached the western marches of Dale, the snows had begun to thaw. Streams ran freely again, glittering like threads of silver, and the smell of wet earth filled the air. From a high ridge, Gandalf beheld Erebor in the distance, the lonely mountain, proud and gleaming in the light of early spring. Smoke rose from its gates, and the hammer song of dwarves echoed faintly across the plain. At that sound, he smiled. It was good to hear the music of craft and labor after the silence of the north. He arrived at the gates of Dale near sunset. The city shone golden in the dying light, its rebuilt towers standing tall upon the banks of the running river. The banners of Bard's Line fluttered in the breeze, the emblem of the black arrow on white, proud symbol of the Dragon Slayer's house. The guards hailed him with respect and sent word ahead, and soon Gandalf stood before King Bane, son of Bard, in the great hall of Dale. The hall was warm with firelight and rich with the scent of pine and iron. The king, though young, bore the strength and calm of his father. "Mithrandir," Bane said as he rose from his seat, "your coming is ever a sign that something is afoot. What brings you to my hall? Tidings of good or ill?" "Of both," said Gandalf. "Good, that the North still stands. Ill, that dark things have stirred again among the ruins of Angmar. A dragon awoke, Hrivangar the Pale, old as the first snows of the world. He is dead now, but the hand that roused him is not idle." A murmur spread among the gathered nobles. Bane's face grew grave. "A dragon awakened again? Then the tales of our grandfathers were not all boasting." "No boast," said Gandalf. "I saw him with mine own eyes. His power was not of his own making. Some spell, woven from the dregs of Morgoth's malice, held him to this world. There are orcs that still bear his mark, and they flee southward now. If they reach the mountains, they may seek alliance with darker lords." Bane leaned upon the arm of his chair, deep in thought. "And what would you have us do, Grey Wanderer? My people are hardy, but we are builders, not conquerors. The dragon's fire once burned this city to ash. We cannot endure another such war." Gandalf met his gaze. "I would have you watch the borders and speak with your allies. Send word to King Dain in Erebor and to Thranduil in the woodland realm. The darkness grows not in one place only. If we are divided, we will fall as swiftly as dry leaves in a storm." The king nodded slowly. "You have my word, Mithrandir. Dale will not stand idle if shadow creeps again over the north." That night, the wizard was given a chamber in the upper halls. He did not sleep. He stood by the window, watching the moon rise over the mountain. From afar came the faint toll of dwarvish forges, steady, rhythmic, unending. It was a sound of life, of hands that worked while others dreamed. And yet beneath it, he thought he heard another sound, soft, distant, and full of unease. The rustle of wings. He turned sharply, peering out into the night sky. There, above the dark line of the hills, a shadow passed, swift and silent. A bird, perhaps, though its shape seemed too vast, its flight too smooth. A chill ran through him. "So," he murmured, "even here, the messengers fly." The next morning, Gandalf crossed the bridge that led from Dale to Erebor. The dwarves greeted him warmly at the gate, for his coming had long been a sign of both counsel and warning. They led him through the deep passages of the mountain, where the air was thick with the smell of stone and forge smoke. At last he came before King Dain Ironfoot in the Hall of Stone, vast and glittering with gold-veined marble. The old dwarf rose from his throne with a smile that barely hid the weight of years. "Gandalf, by Durin's crown, it gladdens my heart to see you here again. What mischief brings you to my door this time?" "No mischief, Dain," said the wizard gravely. "Only danger." He told the tale from beginning to end. The orc bands, the winged lord, the waking of Hrivangar, and the battle amid the frozen ruins. The dwarves listened in silence, their faces growing darker as he spoke. When he was done, Dain leaned back and sighed. "A dragon of ice," he muttered. "And bound by sorcery, you say? Such things haven't walked the north since the elder days." "They have walked again," said Gandalf, "and will again, if left unopposed. Whatever hand moved the Pale One may yet seek others to command. The north must be ready." "Then ready we shall be," said Dain. "My axes will not lie idle while such foes draw breath, or frost. Let the north remember that the dwarves of Erebor do not sleep through danger." A faint smile touched Gandalf's lips. That is all I hoped to hear. They dined that night in the king's hall, where the air was full of the sound of laughter and hammers. But though the feast was rich and the ale strong, Gandalf's mind was far away, upon the cold peaks of Angmar, upon the frozen bones beneath the snow, and upon the dark power that had whispered the Pale One awake. In the deepest part of the night, when even the forges were quiet, the wizard sat alone beside a single lamp. He took from his sleeve a small shard of crystal, pale and cold, a fragment of the binding that had held Hrivangar's spirit. It glowed faintly, as though something yet lived within it. He studied it long, and when he spoke, his voice was low and heavy. So you remain. Not dead, only waiting. But your master's hand will not go unseen forever. He closed his fingers over it, and the light faded. Then Gandalf rose, his shadow long upon the stone, and went to prepare for the journey yet to come. For though the north had quieted, the storm he had glimpsed upon the horizon was gathering strength, and its wings were vast indeed. The days passed quietly beneath the mountain, though the air itself seemed heavy with foreboding. Dain Ironfoot's halls rang with the thunder of forges, and dwarves toiled ceaselessly to strengthen their gates, sharpen their axes, and fill their granaries. Yet even the fires of Erebor could not wholly banish the chill that lingered since Gandalf's tidings. The shadow of the north had fallen long, and all who dwelt in those halls could feel its breath. For a time, the wizard remained among them. He spoke little of what he pondered, but the deep lines upon his brow told much. He spent long hours in the library of Erebor, where ancient scrolls and tablets lay preserved from the days before Smaug's coming. There he sought records of the dragons of old, of their making, their natures, and the powers that once bent them to darker wills. The lore-keepers brought him many things: broken runes from the ruins of Gundabad, fragments of song from Khazad-dûm, and the tales of miners who had glimpsed strange lights beneath the roots of the mountain. To all of these, he listened closely, piecing together some pattern hidden in their words. At length, after several days, Dain came to him, where he sat by the glow of a forge lamp. "You have the look of one who has wrestled long with riddles," said the Dwarf King. "Have you found what you sought?" "Something, though not all," Gandalf answered. "There are whispers in these records of a craft, both ancient and foul. A power wrought by Morgoth's servants to bind the spirits of great beasts to the will of others. Such sorcery was thought destroyed with Angband itself, yet traces may have endured. The ice drake Hrivangar was one such captive, woken by a remnant of that power." Dain frowned deeply, his beard bristling. "And where would such a power hide, if it still lingers?" Gandalf's eyes grew distant. "In darkness, always in darkness. The shards of it may have been carried far, hidden in relics, or preserved by hands that still serve the ancient malice. I fear that somewhere, someone has learned to stir that craft again." The Dwarf King slammed a fist upon the table, making the scrolls jump. "Then let them come. They will find the sons of Durin no easy prey." Gandalf smiled faintly. "Your courage does you honor, old friend. But this enemy will not strike openly. It moves in silence and shadow, testing where the light is thin." Dain studied him for a moment, then said gruffly, "You mean to leave again?" "I do," Gandalf said. "There is more to be learned, and I cannot find it here. The North holds its breath now, but I would know whether that silence is peace or waiting." The king sighed and clasped his arm in the old dwarvish manner. "Then go with my blessing, Mithrandir, and when next you pass this way, I hope it is for feasting, not warnings." "Hope for both," Gandalf replied, smiling. "One seldom goes without the other." The next morning, the wizard departed Erebor. The dwarves lined the gates to see him off, and Dain himself stood beside the archway, his armor gleaming in the sun. Gandalf bowed his head in farewell and rode forth upon Shadowfax, turning his face eastward toward the dark edge of Mirkwood. Spring had begun to stir faintly in the south. The rivers ran fast with the melt of snow, and green buds crept along the branches of the beeches. Yet in the northern air, a strange unease still lingered. The birds that flew above the hills flew low, and their cries were sharp, as if driven by fear. For several days, Gandalf followed the road that wound between the running river and the forest's edge. He passed through small settlements, hardy folk who tilled what land they could between the stone and the shadow. They spoke to him of strange things, of fires in the night upon the high ridges, of frozen beasts found dead at dawn, and of whispers that came from the forest when the moon was full. In one such hamlet, a farmer brought forth a curious thing. It was a stone, smooth and white as bone, and cold to the touch. A faint blue gleam pulsed within it, like the dying heart of a star. "We found it by the stream," the man said nervously. "It burned the grass where it lay. Is it some treasure of the dwarves?" Gandalf took the stone in his hand, feeling the power that coiled within it. His heart sank. "No treasure," he murmured. "A seed of ruin. You did well not to keep it." He cast it into the fire, and at once the flames hissed and turned pale. For a moment, the faces of the onlookers were lit by a ghostly light, and then the stone crumbled into ash, leaving behind the smell of frost and smoke. The farmer crossed himself in fear. What was it? "Something that should have remained buried," Gandalf said. "Forget it now, and speak of it to no one. The land itself must rest from such memories." He left before dawn, his heart heavy. The further east he rode, the more he saw signs of unrest. Orc tracks appeared upon the old roads. The carcasses of beasts lay frozen in unnatural cold. Once, as he made camp upon a wooded slope, he heard a sound like laughter carried on the wind. A deep, echoing laughter that made the fire gutter and the trees shiver. When he turned his gaze toward the forest, he thought he saw a faint light among the trees, blue and flickering, like the ghost of Hrivangar's breath. But when he rose and walked toward it, the light faded, leaving only darkness. 2 days later, he came to the borders of the woodland realm. The tall trees of Mirkwood loomed like sentinels, their branches still heavy with the remnants of winter. At the gate, he was greeted by the elven guards, who recognized him at once and led him swiftly to the halls of King Thranduil. The Elven King received him in his great chamber beneath the earth, where lanterns of silver light hung from the roots of ancient oaks. His crown was of green leaves and berries, and his eyes, bright and keen, shone with both wisdom and weariness. "Mithrandir," said Thranduil, his voice cool as water. "You have wandered long since last you came to my halls. What tidings ride with you now, good or ill?" Gandalf bowed. "Neither wholly good nor wholly ill, my lord, but both together. The north stirs again. A drake awoke in the ruins of Angmar, and though he is now fallen, the power that roused him still moves abroad." The king's gaze sharpened. "A dragon here? So the whispers of my scouts were true." "True indeed," Gandalf replied. "He was bound by sorcery older than any living memory, a relic of the great enemy's making. Such magic does not fade easily." Thranduil's expression grew grave. "The wood has felt it. The beasts are restless, and strange frost gathers even beneath the leaves. My people have found ice upon the roots of trees that have never known winter. That frost is his shadow, said Gandalf. Though the drake is gone, his corruption seeps outward still. It must be watched, and swiftly, before it takes hold. Thranduil rose and walked to the edge of the chamber, where a map of the north was carved into the stone wall. His long fingers traced the lines of mountains and rivers. If the north darkens again, the wood will not stand idle. But I would know this. Do you believe the hand that moved the drake to be Sauron's? Gandalf was silent for a time. Then he said, I cannot yet be sure, but the signs point east, to lands where his servants still whisper his name. If he did not command this, then another who serves him did. The Elven King's eyes flashed like steel. Then we will strengthen our borders. Let no creature pass through the wood unmarked. That is wise, Gandalf said. But remember, my friend, not all evils walk in plain sight. Some come softly, like mist before dawn. The king inclined his head. And yet, the mist may hide its own undoing. The wood will endure, as it always has. When the council was done, Thranduil offered him a chamber to rest in, but Gandalf refused with a smile. Rest is for those who have finished their journey, he said. Mine still lies before me. And so, before night had fully fallen, he rode forth once more beneath the boughs of Mirkwood. The wind whispered through the branches above, and far off, beyond sight or sound, a single raven took flight, winging southward toward darker lands. The world was changing. The signs were plain to those who looked, and Gandalf, as he rode through the shadowed forest, knew in his heart that the quiet peace of the north had been but a pause before the storm. He whispered to the night, as if to some unseen listener. So it begins again. The stirring of wings unseen. May the west hold firm when they reach its sky. The trees gave no answer, but the wind carried his words far, out over the darkened world. The night deepened as Gandalf rode beneath the shadowed boughs of Mirkwood. The air was cool and heavy, filled with the scent of moss and damp earth. From the black canopy above, no star dared shine, for the forest was thick as woven shadow. Every hoofbeat of Shadowfax echoed faintly, as if the trees themselves listened. Though he had passed through Mirkwood many times before, the wizard felt a difference now, a change in the breath of the wood. There was unease in the whisper of the leaves, and an old sadness in the murmuring streams. The very roots seemed to remember the passage of some dark power. He rode for 2 days along the forest road, moving eastward toward its heart. Once, as he paused to rest by a still pool, he saw a faint gleam beneath the water's surface, a ripple of light, cold and pale. When he reached down, the glow vanished, yet the chill that lingered upon his fingers told him that the drake's shadow had passed this way too. By the 3rd night, the forest grew darker still. The air was filled with the hum of unseen insects and the soft rustle of wings. The light of his staff burned low, for he wished not to draw unwanted eyes. Yet even as he rode in silence, he sensed that he was being followed. At dawn, when the first grey light touched the eastern sky, a figure stepped from the trees ahead, tall, slender, and cloaked in green. Gandalf reined in Shadowfax, but his hand did not go to his sword. The figure threw back its hood, revealing a face fair and keen-eyed. "Gandalf the Grey," said the newcomer, her voice soft as falling rain. "Few wander so deep into the wood unbidden." The wizard smiled. "And fewer still meet me without surprise. I know your face, though it has been long since last we met. Galion's daughter, Lorianel of the Woodland Guard." The elf bowed lightly. "You remember well. The king sent me to watch the borders, yet it seems I have found a greater purpose. Strange things move beneath the leaves, and birds carry tidings of frost in the north." Gandalf inclined his head. "Then our paths meet in good hour. I have come from Erebor and Dale, bearing word of that same frost. A dragon has fallen, but the chill of his malice lingers. Tell me, what have your eyes seen here?" She hesitated, glancing toward the east where the forest thickened into shadow. The trees whisper of cold roots and lights that wander by night. We have found beasts frozen in their dens and streams turned to ice though no winter's breath touched them. And 3 days passed, my scout saw orcs, not many, but enough, creeping beneath the eaves, marked with a winged sign upon their armor. The wizard's face darkened. "So it spreads," he murmured. "The remnant flees south, seeking refuge in places still ripe for corruption. This must not be allowed." Lorianel's eyes narrowed. "Then let us hunt them. The wood does not suffer uninvited guests." So Gandalf and the elf set out together, leaving the main road behind. They moved swiftly and in silence through the deep forest, guided by signs only elven eyes could see. A broken fern here, a scuffed root there, the faint scent of smoke carried on the wind. By evening, they reached a hollow where the earth dipped sharply between 2 ridges. There, among the roots of ancient oaks, they found the remnants of a camp. Ashes still warm, a few crude blades, and a banner half buried in leaves. Upon the banner was stitched a white wing upon black cloth. Gandalf knelt beside it, running his hand across the fabric. "The mark of Hrivangar's host," he said softly. "But these orcs are not merely scattered. They move with purpose. Someone guides them still." Lorianel studied the ground. "They left not long ago, perhaps a few hours, southward, toward the Narrows." "The Narrows," Gandalf repeated, his gaze turning distant. "Then they seek the old stronghold of Dol Guldur. If that place yet festers, they will find more than shadows waiting." The elf's hand went to her bow. "Then we must follow." And follow they did, through the long night and the following day. The forest grew more oppressive the further south they went. Great webs hung from the trees, glistening in the dim light, and the ground was slick with decay. The air reeked of rot and something colder still, the scent of old evil, faint but unmistakable. By the time they reached the slopes of Amon Lank, the day was dying. The hill rose before them like a wound upon the forest, its crown bare and blackened where no green things grew. The ruins of Dol Guldur crouched there, silent and half buried in shadow. Lorianel drew back her hood, her face pale in the dim light. "It was cleansed after the war," she whispered. "How can this darkness remain?" "Some stains never fade," Gandalf said grimly. "And some evils, once banished, leave doors half open." They moved cautiously among the ruins, the elf's bow ready, Gandalf's staff casting a dim glow upon the stones. The air was heavy, thick as smoke. Somewhere deep within the fortress, they heard the faint sound of water dripping, slow, deliberate, endless. Then came another sound, a low, rasping growl. Shadows shifted among the pillars. From the darkness, figures emerged, orcs, a score or more, their armor blackened and frost-touched. Their eyes gleamed with unnatural light. At their head stood a tall figure, cloaked and hooded. When it spoke, its voice was cold and dry, like ice breaking on stone. "So the Grey Pilgrim walks again beneath my roof. You should have stayed to your fires, old one." Gandalf's hand tightened on his staff. "I know that voice. Show yourself." The hooded figure laughed, a hollow, chilling sound. It cast back its cloak, revealing a helm of pale iron carved in the shape of wings. Beneath it, the face was not wholly living, flesh drawn tight upon bone, eyes alight with blue fire. "Who are you?" demanded Lorienel. "I am that which remained," the figure said, "the herald of the winged lord, who will rise again from frost and flame alike." At those words, the orcs howled and surged forward. Gandalf raised his staff, and white fire leapt forth, scattering them like leaves before a gale. Beside him, the elf loosed arrow after arrow, each finding its mark. Yet the hooded herald didn't fall. It raised a hand, and a blast of freezing wind swept through the hall, snuffing Gandalf's fire and dimming the light. "Your master is dead," Gandalf said, his voice ringing against the stone. "His wings are broken, his body dust beneath the snow." The herald's eyes burned brighter. "You know nothing, grey fool. Death is no prison to the winged lord. His spirit flies still, and I am its vessel. You may strike me down, but he will return, as he always has." Then it lifted its blade, and the battle began in earnest. The clash of steel and the crack of flame filled the ruin. Gandalf fought with the fury of the storm, his staff blazing once more, while Lorienel moved swift as light beside him. In the end, the herald fell, struck by the elf's arrow through the throat and crushed beneath Gandalf's wrathful flame. Yet as it died, its voice rose in a terrible whisper. "You cannot end him. He rises on the wings of the storm." When the last echo faded, silence fell. Only the drip of water remained, and the stench of burnt flesh. Lorienel lowered her bow, breathing hard. "Is it done?" she asked. "For now," Gandalf said, but his words carry truth enough. Something greater than this creature stirs, something that dreams still of flight. He turned his gaze south, where the darkness of Mordor lay far beyond the horizon. The wings of the north have fallen silent, but their shadow flies still. And I must follow it, wherever it leads. The elf bowed her head. "Then I will guide you to the forest's edge. No traveler should walk alone when the night remembers such names." And so they left the ruins, the dark hill behind them. Yet as they rode beneath the stars, Gandalf looked once more to the north. In the far distance, faint and ghostly, a single streak of pale light crossed the sky, like the beating of great wings in the cold air. He said no word, but his eyes were grave, for he knew the battle was not ended, merely begun. Morning came slow to Mirkwood, seeping between the boughs like pale smoke. Gandalf and Lorienel rode in silence, their horses picking their way through roots and shadows. Behind them, the black mound of Dol Guldur was fading into the mist, though its memory clung like a stain. Neither spoke of what they had seen, for the echo of the herald's voice still haunted their thoughts. He rises on the wings of the storm. By noon, the forest thinned. The air grew lighter, the ground firmer beneath the horses' hoofs. Birds sang again, though their songs were wary. At last, they came to the edge of the woodland realm, where sunlight pierced the canopy in long, golden lances. There, Lorienel drew rein and turned to Gandalf. "Beyond this border, my road ends," she said. "The king's word was to guard the realm, not to wander from it. But I will send word of what we found. The wood will watch the skies, and the rangers of the trees will not sleep." Gandalf inclined his head. "Your aid was well given, Lorienel. The light still shines brighter for hearts such as yours." The elf smiled faintly, though her eyes were troubled. "May the Valar guard your path, Mithrandir. If the storm truly gathers, then all our fates will meet it in time." They parted there, at the border where the wild met the free lands of the river running. Gandalf rode on alone, his thoughts heavy and his eyes turned southward. The path before him led toward the wide vales of the Anduin, a road he knew well, for it was the same he had once taken on darker errands. For days he journeyed thus, through meadows where the thawing snow gave way to green shoots of spring. Farmers were returning to their fields. Children ran by the roadside, chasing lambs, and smoke rose from distant hearths. To the common eye, the world seemed peaceful, reborn from the sleep of winter. But to Gandalf, every shadow whispered of unrest. One evening he came to a small inn near the crossing of the Celduin, where merchants from Dale and the Woodman met to trade furs, grain, and ale. The place was warm and loud with laughter, and for the first time in many days, Gandalf took rest among common folk. He listened as they spoke of markets and weather, of new mines opened in the Iron Hills, but beneath their words he caught a note of fear. "Strange things up north," said a red-bearded trader, his voice lowered. "I've seen lights over the mountains, blue lights, dancing like ghost fires, and twice we found carcasses of deer, frozen stiff though the air was warm as spring." "Old tales," scoffed another. "You've had too much mead." "Old tales," the first muttered darkly, "and old evils. My grandsire fought at Dale, when Smaug fell. He said dragons don't die, they wait. And when the cold wind comes, they wake again." At that, Gandalf stirred his pipe, sending a thin ribbon of smoke curling into the rafters. "Your grandsire was not altogether wrong," he said quietly. "But fear not. Those who guard the north still wake before the dragons do." The men turned to stare, realizing whom they spoke with. Then one by one they nodded, as though reassured by the wizard's calm. Gandalf smiled faintly, but said no more. His heart, however, was far from easy. That night, when the inn had grown silent, he sat by the window watching the stars wheel above. The sky was clear and vast, the constellations bright. Yet in the far north, faint and fleeting, a streak of pale light crossed the heavens, too swift for a star, too smooth for a bird. He sighed. "So it begins," he murmured, "as it always does." Quietly. At dawn he set forth again, crossing the Celduin and riding south along the long plains that bordered the river. His path would take him through the Gladden fields and thence toward Lorien, where he hoped to seek the counsel of Galadriel. Few others in Middle-earth could match her knowledge of the shadowed arts that had stirred the Drake, or of the ancient powers that still haunted the world. The days grew warmer as he rode, and soon the snow vanished from the hills entirely. Wildflowers opened in the meadows, and the Anduin shone bright as molten silver under the sun. Yet for all the beauty of the land, Gandalf felt a heaviness in his heart. There was no peace in the songs of the birds, only haste, and even the river seemed to murmur warnings in its endless flow. He camped one night beside a grove of willows. The air was still and the stars thick above. As he sat smoking his pipe, he heard the rustle of wings overhead. Not the fluttering of small birds, but a heavier sound, slow and deliberate. Shadowfax stirred and stamped, ears flicking. Gandalf rose, peering into the dark sky. Something passed across the moon, vast for a moment, blotting it out. Then it was gone. He stood long after, listening, but no sound came again save the whisper of the wind through the trees. At dawn he found strange marks in the soft earth, talon prints, deep and wide, the frost still unthawed within them. He bent low, touching one, and the cold bit deep into his skin. "No mere carrion birds," he said grimly. So the herald's words were truth. The spirit still wanders. That evening, the land began to change. The air grew thick with mist, and the light dimmed though the sun had not yet set. Gandalf felt a pressure upon his mind, a watching presence, as though unseen eyes followed his every step. When he looked toward the south, the horizon seemed darker, a shadow lying across the far hills. He pressed onward until the third day brought him to the northern borders of the Gladden Fields. The wetlands shimmered in the fading light, a mirror for the sky. Long reeds swayed in the breeze, whispering of old memories, of Isildur's fall, and of the ring lost beneath the waters. Gandalf felt a pang as he passed. So many of the world's sorrows had their roots here, where greed and doom had met. He made camp upon a rise of dry ground, the reeds sighing around him. As night fell, the mist thickened, curling like smoke across the marshes. Then came a sound, faint at first, like distant thunder. But it was not thunder. It was the beating of wings. Gandalf stood, his staff blazing to life. "Show yourself," he commanded, his voice carrying across the still air. "I know your scent, servant of frost." From the mist came a shriek, long and piercing, and a shape burst from the fog. Not a dragon, but a vast, ghostly form, half seen, its body made of shadow and ice. It circled once above him, wings stirring the reeds into a frenzy, and in its wake the temperature dropped until the air crackled with frost. Gandalf raised his staff, and fire sprang forth, golden and fierce. The apparition faltered, its wings beating furiously, but did not vanish. Instead, a voice filled the night, a voice like wind over a grave. "He calls, Grey Wanderer. He calls from the east, and the wings of the storm shall bear him hence." Then, with a cry like tearing metal, the shape dissolved into mist, leaving only silence and the faint glitter of frost upon the reeds. Gandalf stood motionless, his staff still alight. At last he lowered it, the fire dimming. "So it is true," he said softly. "The Pale One's spirit flies still, drawn to some master beyond mortal reach. The storm gathers at last." He looked to the east, where the stars were paling before dawn. There, in the far distance, lay lands few now dared name. Mordor, and beyond it the wastelands of the uncharted world. Somewhere out there, a will was waking. And so, as the first light touched the world, Gandalf mounted Shadowfax once more. The reeds shivered in his passing, and the frost melted from their tips as the sun rose. But though morning came bright upon the land, the wizard's heart was heavy, for he knew the shadow had taken wing again, and the age of calm that had followed the war was drawing to its end. He whispered to the wind as he rode, "Fly then, spirit of the north. The storm you serve will find me waiting." And far off, across the sky, a faint glimmer moved, like wings gleaming in the dawn. The dawn spread pale over the Gladden Fields, washing the reeds in a wavering gold. Gandalf rode swiftly through the mists, his cloak heavy with dew, his mind burdened by what he had seen in the night. The ghostly wings still echoed in his memory, and the words that had followed, "He calls from the east," rang like a warning bell in his heart. The Anduin flowed broad and steady beside him, its surface gleaming like polished glass. But even its calm voice could not soothe him. He had walked through ages enough to know the shape of evil when it stirred, softly, unseen through messengers and omens, before it grew into storm. He rode until midday, when the land began to rise into long, rolling hills. The marsh gave way to open country, dotted with ancient stones and the ruins of forgotten walls. Here the air was clearer, touched with the faint scent of grass and river wind. But Gandalf did not rest. His road now bent westward, toward Lorien, where the lady's wisdom might yet shed light upon the dark riddle of the north. By evening, he came to the forest's border, a wall of pale silver trees whose leaves shimmered faintly even in the dusk. The light that dwelt there was not of sun or moon, but its own, soft and enduring. When he set foot upon the grass beyond the eaves, the air grew still, and he felt again the quiet majesty of that hidden realm. Elves of the Galadrim met him there, cloaked in grey and green. Their captain bowed low. "You are known to us, Mithrandir," he said. "The lady foresaw your coming. She waits within the golden wood." They guided him through the twilight paths, and though he had trodden them many times before, still he felt that strange wonder, the hush of eternal spring, the murmur of unseen voices singing among the leaves. The heart of the wood glowed softly ahead, where the great malon trees rose like pillars of light. When they reached Caras Galadon, he dismounted and climbed the winding stair to the high flet of Galadriel and Celeborn. The lady awaited him beneath the golden boughs, her white garments shimmering like starlight through mist. Her eyes were deep and bright, and in them he saw the reflection of things both near and far. "Mithrandir," she said, her voice like music that had no beginning. "The wings of the north have stirred again. I have felt their shadow upon the winds." Gandalf bowed. "Then you know what has passed. The Pale One awoke from his sleep, bound by dark sorcery. Though his body lies slain, his spirit still flies, summoned by some power from the east." Galadriel's gaze grew grave. "Long have I watched the north, and long have I felt its unease. The evil that bound the dragon was no new work. It is an echo of the ancient darkness, the same that once whispered to Sauron in the deep of time." Celeborn, standing beside her, folded his hands. "The remnants of Angmar's sorcery endure still in hidden places. We should have scoured them when the Witch King fell, yet even the might of Gondor could not cleanse all that he had wrought." "The Witch King's ruin is old dust now," said Gandalf, "but the hand that touched Hrivangar's spirit bore the mark of Morgoth's first servants. Some fragment of that power remains, and it grows bolder." Galadriel's eyes turned eastward. "There are places where the world is thin, and where the old songs of creation have been twisted. From such cracks, the lost things crawl back into the light." For a long time none spoke. The sound of wind among the golden leaves was soft as breath. At last, Gandalf said, "If this spirit is called from the east, then it seeks a master, or already serves one. The herald I slew in Dol Guldur spoke of the winged lord, reborn through storm and frost. Whether he lies or no, I cannot say. But the orcs flee southward, drawn as metal to a lodestone." "The east," murmured Celeborn, "beyond the sea of Rhûn, beyond even the eyes of the wise. There are dark lands there still, uncharted and unpurged." Galadriel raised her hand, and light blossomed from the ring she bore. "The Sea of Rhûn hides many forgotten shores. I have seen in thought faint tremors, a stirring in the dust of long-dead temples, and the echo of songs sung to no sun or moon. If this spirit flies that way, it is to a land where memory itself is blind." Gandalf frowned. "Then I must seek the truth there, though the road be perilous. For if a shadow rises in those far places, it will not remain far for long. The world grows small when darkness spreads." "You are ever restless, grey wanderer," said Galadriel gently. "But even the wise must tread with care. The east is wild and wide, and few among the free peoples now dwell there. Take counsel from the Eldar of Rivendell before you go. Elrond's wisdom is deep, and his eyes turn further east than most." "I will do so," said Gandalf. "Yet I fear time hastens. The signs gather as storm clouds do before the rain. The spirit of Hrivangar is not idle. It moves with purpose. If it reaches its master, the north may burn again." Galadriel regarded him long, her gaze far away, as if she saw through the mists of ages. "Then the storm must be met before it grows," she said. "I will send word to the Lord of Rivendell, and to the havens of the west. The winds of warning will go before you." Gandalf bowed his head. "As ever, my thanks, Lady of Light. The world would be darker still if not for your watch." She smiled faintly. "The world is ever dark and ever bright, depending on where one stands. Go now, Mithranda. The north has tested you. The east will demand more." When he left the Flet, the moon had risen high above the trees, casting silver fire upon the golden leaves. He walked alone through the forest paths, thinking deeply. He felt the pull of the east as a current beneath his feet, something unseen but powerful, whispering from beyond the horizon. At dawn, he mounted Shadowfax once more and turned westward toward the river, intending to cross the Anduin at the northern ford. The light of Lorien lingered behind him, glowing faintly through the trees, a memory of peace amid the growing storm. For 3 days, he rode through the meadows and along the wooded banks of the river. Each night, he looked to the sky, half expecting to see the pale shimmer of spectral wings. Yet the heavens were silent, save for the stars. On the 4th day, as he neared the borders of the great river's upper reaches, a messenger found him, a swift elf from Lorien, bearing a single letter sealed with silver wax. The message was brief, written in Galadriel's hand. "The winds shift. A shadow stirs beyond Rune. Seek Elrond with haste, and beware the voice of the storm. It is not the voice of the wind." Gandalf folded the letter and tucked it into his cloak. His face was grim, but his eyes shone with a quiet fire. "Then the path is clear," he said softly. "To Rivendell, and thence beyond. The storm calls, and I must answer." He turned Shadowfax northward once more. The river sang beside him, bright and untroubled, but far above its song came another, a distant rumble of thunder from the eastern sky. And in that sound, faint yet certain, Gandalf thought he heard the beating of unseen wings. The river ran beside him like a long, unbroken song, glinting in the pale light of dawn. Mist lay upon the fields, and the wind from the east carried with it a strange scent, not of rain or spring, but of metal and frost. Gandalf felt it prickle along his skin as he rode northward toward the misty mountains. The words of Galadriel's letter echoed in his mind. "Beware the voice of the storm. It is not the voice of the wind." For 3 days he rode in silence, stopping little, speaking to none. The land here was fair and quiet, but the quiet was uneasy. Once or twice he thought he glimpsed shapes far off among the low hills, riders, or perhaps shadows only. And each night he woke from sleep to hear the distant mutter of thunder. Yet the skies were clear. On the 4th morning, as he reached the foothills of the Hithegler, he saw a small company of men making camp by the river. They were rangers of the north, and their banner bore the 7 stars and crown of Arna. When Gandalf approached, one of them rose swiftly and bowed low. "Hail, Mithranda," the ranger said. "You come as if driven by a wind none but you can feel. What news from the south?" "Little good," said Gandalf, dismounting. "The drake that once slept beneath Angmar has been slain, yet his spirit wanders still. And worse, he flies eastward, drawn by a will greater than his own. What of the north? Have you seen aught that should not be?" The ranger's face darkened. "Aye, the skies have not been empty these past nights. There are wings aloft, unseen by most, but my men have felt their shadow. One of our watchtowers was struck by storm without lightning. Its stones rhymed with frost come morning. We thought it sorcery, though we could not name the hand that wrought it. Then the herald spoke truth, Gandalf murmured. The wings of the storm have not yet folded. He looked to the east, where the land faded into haze. And beyond those clouds lies the answer to this riddle. I go to Rivendell to gather counsel, and thence to the borders of Rhûn. The ranger frowned. Few who go that far east return. The lands beyond the sea are wild and nameless. Gandalf's eyes kindled with a faint light. So were all lands once. But darkness unchallenged grows bold. It is not my place to wait for it to come knocking at the gates of the west. He clasped the man's arm in parting. Keep your watch, friend of the Dunedain. Guard the north well. Its safety now rests on the edge of a knife. The rangers bowed and watched as he mounted Shadowfax once more and turned westward toward the mountain passes that would lead him down into the hidden valley of Rivendell. For 2 days he climbed the winding paths, through ravines where old snow still clung and the wind wailed like distant voices. On the 3rd evening, when the sun sank behind the peaks, he descended into the valley of Imladris. There the air grew softer, the streams murmured gently, and the first stars glimmered in the gathering dusk. The house of Elrond lay bathed in the silver light of evening. Lamps burned in the high windows, and the sound of harp strings floated through the air like water over stone. When Gandalf crossed the bridge and entered the courtyard, Elrond himself came forth to meet him, his dark hair bound in silver, his face calm but watchful. "You bring tidings, old friend," said Elrond, "and I fear by your look that they are not good ones." "Not good," Gandalf answered, "but needful. The north has stirred again. A dragon, bound by ancient sorcery, awoke in the wastes of Angmar. His name was Hrivangar the Pale, and his wrath might have undone the north had we not slain him. Yet his death is no ending. His spirit was called forth by a greater will, one that whispers still from the east." Elrond's gaze grew grave. "The east," he murmured. "Ever the shadow turns that way, and ever it returns. There are powers sleeping there that even Sauron feared to waken." "I have heard that fear," said Gandalf, "but fear unspoken is a seed. It grows in silence. I mean to find the hand that calls to these ancient spirits." "Then you will need more than courage," Elrond said. "The lands beyond Rhûn are perilous, full of forgotten kingdoms and beasts older than men. There are remnants there of Morgoth's first brood, and tribes who worship what they do not understand." "That is why I come," Gandalf said. "Not to conquer, but to learn. If the shadow gathers there, we must know its face before it shows its teeth." Elrond led him to the great hall, where firelight flickered on the polished stone. They sat long in council, speaking of the days when the north was strong and of the ruin of Angmar. Elrond recalled the Witch King's fall and the blight that lingered afterward, the frost that would not melt, the strange storms that came from nowhere. At length, he rose and went to a high shelf, taking down a slender, ancient scroll bound in silver thread. "This was written in the last days of Arna," he said. "It tells of a storm that walked like a living thing, a spirit of cold bound to the will of the Dark Lord's captain. Perhaps what you have seen is the same, an echo that never died." Gandalf took the scroll and read the faded words. There, in a hand long dead, was written, "Beware the servants of the winged host, who move unseen upon the winds. Their master fell into shadow, yet his voice endures where cold and ruin dwell. His breath freezes, his whisper binds. Where he flies, winter follows, and no fire may endure." He looked up. "The winged host," he said, "a name lost to time. If any remnant remains, it must be far beyond our sight." Elrond nodded. "Far, but not beyond the reach of your purpose, it seems. You are ever drawn to where the world frays." The wizard smiled faintly. "Someone must be. It will not mend itself." When their council ended, Gandalf was given rest in the western chamber that overlooked the river. Yet though the bed was soft and the air fragrant with pine, sleep would not come. He stood long at the balcony, looking east. There, above the dark outline of the mountains, faint clouds gathered, thin, grey, and strangely luminous, as if touched by light from beneath. Once he thought he saw a flicker of movement, vast and fleeting, like wings across the stars. "Not yet," he said softly. "But soon." At dawn he met Elrond again in the courtyard. "I will ride east," he said simply. "Beyond the mountains, beyond the river running, until the edge of the maps. If the storm has a voice, I will hear it." Elrond laid a hand upon his shoulder. "Then may the stars of Varda guide you, Mithrandir. And if you do not return, your name shall yet be spoken in song." Gandalf smiled, his eyes bright beneath the brim of his hat. "I have no wish for songs, only for quiet days. But it seems Middle-earth will grant neither until its work is done." He mounted Shadowfax, and the horse leapt forward, swift as thought. The valley fell away behind them, and the sun rose over the mountains, casting gold upon the snow-capped peaks. The road east lay long and uncharted, but the wizard didn't falter. His cloak streamed behind him like smoke, and the wind carried his words softly into the morning air. "Wings of the storm, wings of the north," he murmured. "Let us see whose flight is swifter." And somewhere far beyond the mountains, unseen by any mortal eye, the storm stirred, and a faint whisper answered him, cold and distant as the void. Beyond the passes of the misty mountains, the world broadened into a vast wilderness of wind and stone. Gandalf rode alone across that wide desolation, his grey cloak whipping behind him, his staff glinting faintly in the pale light. Days passed without the sight of hearth or hall, for this was the edge of all known lands, a place where few dared wander, and fewer still returned. The north lay far behind him now, buried beneath ice and memory. Yet the shadow of it followed, whispering on every gust of cold air. Sometimes, when the sky was overcast and the land hushed, he thought he could hear the faint beat of wings above the clouds. It was not sound so much as sensation, a stirring that made the hair rise at the nape of his neck, as if the world itself were listening. On the 5th day, he came to the high moors that sloped down toward the lands of Rhûn. The grasses there were short and grey, moving like waves beneath the wind. He saw no birds, no beasts, only the endless sweep of the horizon. In that lonely expanse, time seemed to slow, and even the sun felt colder. Toward evening, he found an ancient ruin, the remnants of a watchtower long fallen, its stones half buried by earth. He made his camp within the shelter of its walls, kindling a small fire that crackled faintly in the gloom. As he sat smoking his pipe, the smoke rose in pale spirals, twisting strangely as though drawn by some unseen breath. He frowned, setting his pipe aside. "Show yourself," he said quietly. A faint shimmer passed through the air, and from the shadows stepped a figure, cloaked in dust. It was a man, or something like one, tall and gaunt, his garments tattered, his eyes hollow. The edges of his form wavered, half real, half shadow. "Who are you?" Gandalf asked, his hand resting lightly upon his staff. The figure's voice was thin as wind through reeds. "A servant once, of the winged host. I was bound to the breath of Hrivangar, the Pale One. Now he is gone, and I am nothing." Gandalf's gaze sharpened. "Then tell me what power bound you? What name called you from the dark?" The ghost shuddered. "No name that may be spoken. a whisper from the east, older than the sun, older than the stars that crown the north. It calls to all that sleeps in ice and ash. It will call again. The wizard's eyes gleamed beneath the brim of his hat. And where does this whisper dwell? The ghost's face twisted in pain. Beyond the sea of Rune, in the lands where the black towers stand, drowned beneath the dust. There the voice waits, dreaming of flight. Beware it, grey wanderer. Even your fire will freeze before it. With those words, the shade faded, unraveling into mist. The night wind sighed through the ruins, and the fire flickered low. Gandalf sat long in silence, pondering what he had heard. The Sea of Rune, the very edge of the map. Few among the free peoples had ever gone so far. Yet now his path was clear. He rose before dawn, stamping out the embers, and turned Shadowfax's head eastward once more. The sky above was streaked with red, and the wind had a bite of frost, though spring lay upon the world. Days turned to weeks as he crossed the wild lands. He passed through valleys where strange monoliths jutted from the earth like the bones of forgotten gods. He forded rivers whose waters ran blue as ice and cold as death. Sometimes he glimpsed movement far off, shapes too large to be wolves, too swift to be men. But they never drew near. At last, after many leagues, the land began to fall away toward a vast basin. There, beneath a sky of endless grey, lay the Sea of Rune, not blue, but the color of steel, its waters restless under a bitter wind. Gandalf rode down to its shore and beheld a sight that made his heart sink. Ruins lay scattered along the water's edge, towers half collapsed, docks broken and sunken, statues worn to faceless stone. It was a dead city, its name lost to history, but its silence spoke of greatness once. The very air hummed with a power old and cold. Shadowfax snorted uneasily. "Aye, I feel it too," Gandalf murmured, stroking the horse's mane. "We have come to the edge of memory itself." He dismounted and walked among the ruins, his staff casting a faint glow. Strange runes marked the stones, curling sigils unlike any script of elves or men. The mark seemed to shift when he looked at them too long, as though they were alive. In the heart of the city stood a vast circular platform of black marble, cracked and rimmed with frost, though the air was still. At its center lay a pit, deep, silent, and filled with a faint, shimmering light. Gandalf approached warily. The light was pale blue, pulsing softly, like the heartbeat of some sleeping creature. When he leaned closer, a voice rose from the depths, soft, cold, and familiar. Mithrandir. He stiffened. It was not the voice of the ghost, nor of any living thing. It was the same tone he had heard in the storm above the Gladden fields. The whisper that had spoken from the shadow's wings. "Who speaks?" he demanded, his voice echoing through the ruins. The light within the pit flared, and a wind swept outward, scattering dust and ash. "Once you knew me by another name," the voice said. "I am the last breath of the north, the frost upon forgotten bones. You slew my servant, broke my chain, yet my wings were never yours to bind." Gandalf raised his staff, and fire flared at its tip. "You are the remnant of a greater evil, nothing more. Speak plainly, or vanish back into your hole." The pit pulsed again, and laughter like cracking ice filled the air. "You think yourself fire, Grey Wanderer, but every fire burns out. Every dawn is swallowed by the night that follows. The north was only the beginning. I will rise with the storm, and when I fly again, the world shall remember fear." The ground trembled. The sea heaved, waves crashing upon the dead shore. From the pit rose a column of light, coiling upward like a serpent of ice. Within it, Gandalf saw a shape, vast, winged and formless, its eyes twin stars of pale flame. He stood his ground, the light of his staff blazing like a sun. "Then you will find the West unyielding," he cried. "Fly where you will, spirit of ruin, but the world is not yours to unmake." With that, he struck his staff upon the marble, and a great sound rang out, not of thunder, but of pure, blinding flame. Fire met frost, and the air exploded with white light. The spirit shrieked, its voice tearing the sky itself. The waves rose high, and the ruins shuddered as if the earth would split. When the light faded, Gandalf stood alone. The pit was gone, filled with broken stone. The wind was still, the sea calm once more. He leaned upon his staff, weary but unbowed. "So ends your whisper, for now," he said softly. "But even ashes may dream." As the sun rose over the eastern sea, the light caught upon the broken stones, turning them to gold. Shadowfax nickered softly and came to his side. Gandalf mounted, turning his gaze westward once more. "The storm has a name now," he murmured, "and names, once spoken, cannot easily be forgotten." He rode into the sunrise, and the wind carried his cloak behind him like the shadow of a great wing, the last remnant of the battle between fire and frost, and the herald of storms yet to come. The wind off the Sea of Rune carried with it a smell of cold salt and forgotten ages. Gandalf rode westward once more, Shadowfax's hooves ringing softly on the stone roads that wound through the ruins of the old kingdoms. Behind him, the pale gleam upon the horizon faded. The sea sank into silence, as though its voice had been stilled by the battle of light and frost that had shaken its depths. For 3 days, the wizard rode in solitude. The sky above was wide and cold, the earth barren save for the occasional thistle that trembled in the wind. No birds sang, no beasts stirred. Even the rivers seemed hushed, their waters running clear and slow beneath a veil of mist. He did not rest often, for he felt the pull of the West, of the lands where life endured, and where the shadows of his long struggle might yet be turned aside. But his heart was heavy with foreboding. The thing he had seen in the ruins, the winged spirit born of ice and hatred, was not destroyed. Its body was broken, its voice silenced, yet its essence had not wholly faded. He had felt it in the trembling of the air and the faint dimming of the light, as though the world itself had drawn a breath of fear. When the third night fell, he made camp upon a rise overlooking the plains. The stars burned bright above him, and for the first time since his battle at the sea, the sky was clear of clouds. He sat beside a small fire, his pipe glowing faintly in the dark. The wind murmured through the grass like the far-off sound of surf. He spoke aloud, though there was no one to hear. "It is never truly ended, is it? The shadow rises, it falls and rises again. Always another name, another shape, and I am left to follow the same path, as though time itself walks in circles." He smiled then, though the weariness did not leave his eyes. "Ah, but such is the way of things. The light does not win by strength, only by endurance. So long as even one hand kindles a flame, the dark can never claim all." At dawn he continued his journey. The road turned northward now, following the curve of the River Carnan toward the lands of Dale and Erebor. Spring was stirring there, and the smell of thawing earth rose on the wind. Yet as he drew nearer to the living lands, the signs of shadow followed still. Twice he found travelers upon the road, merchants from the east, their wagons laden with silks and spices. They greeted him with fear and wonder, for few had seen a wizard of the west. From them he learned that strange things had been seen in the eastern sky. Storms that came without rain, flocks of black birds that flew in circles for days, and a great shadow that moved across the moon, though no cloud was there. Gandalf thanked them and passed on, his thoughts growing darker. He knew now that the thing he had faced had not perished utterly. Spirits of that kind didn't die. They scattered like seeds upon the wind, waiting for soil fit to take root. By the 6th day, he reached the edge of Dale's farmlands. There, among the fields newly green, the world seemed alive again. Smoke rose from distant chimneys, and the sound of hammers echoed faintly across the valley. Yet even amid such peace, he felt the tremor of unease that always preceded the storm. At the gates of Dale, the guards recognized him at once. "Mithrandir," one cried, bowing low, "the king will rejoice to see you returned." He smiled kindly, though his eyes were grave. Then let us not delay his rejoicing. In the great hall of Dale, King Bane rose to greet him. "Grey Wanderer," said the king, "you come and go like the wind, but always your coming bears the weight of tidings. Speak then. What news do you bring from the east?" Gandalf laid aside his staff and cloak. "I bring warning. The shadow that once touched the north has not yet faded. Its root lies far beyond the Sea of Rune, in a power that even the enemy once feared. I have seen its echo, and though I have broken its vessel, the spirit endures. You must guard your borders well, for when the storm rises again, it will strike swiftly." A hush fell upon the hall. The nobles glanced uneasily at one another, and even Bane's steady gaze flickered with concern. "The North has known peace since Smaug's fall," he said at last. "But if this darkness comes again, Dale will not stand idle. Erebor's forges burn bright, and the bows of the wood are keen." "Courage alone will not suffice," Gandalf warned gently. "The enemy you face does not fight with sword or flame. It moves unseen, whispering in the minds of the greedy and the fearful. Watch the winds, my lord. If they carry a chill that lingers too long, bar your gates and light your fires." The king bowed his head. "Your words are heeded, Mithrandir. The North will be vigilant." That night, Gandalf walked alone through the streets of Dale. The city was quiet, its windows warm with lamplight. Children laughed in the courtyards, and from the taverns came the sound of song, yet to his ears all of it seemed fragile, as if the joy of men were a thin flame trembling before a breath too strong to resist. He wandered to the river bank, where the waters of the running river gleamed under the moon. There he stood for a long while, gazing northward. In the far distance, the peaks of the grey mountains were faintly visible, their crowns still tipped with snow. For a moment, he thought he saw something moving against that pale backdrop, a dark shape, vast and slow, gliding across the stars. But when he blinked, it was gone. "Not yet broken," he murmured. "Only waiting." He turned back toward the city. The night was deep, but a thin glow touched the eastern sky, the first light of dawn. And in that fragile brightness, the world seemed, for a heartbeat, whole again. When morning came, Gandalf took his leave of King Bane and the people of Dale. He would ride west now, to Rivendell once more, and from there decide what must be done. The north was quiet for the moment, but he had learned too well that such quiet was only the pause before thunder. As he mounted Shadowfax, Daenir, the dwarf who had once journeyed with him to the frozen wastes, came forth from among the onlookers. His beard was flecked with silver now, but his eyes were still keen. "You're chasing storms again, Grey Wanderer," he said gruffly. "Can't you ever rest?" "Rest?" Gandalf chuckled softly. "Perhaps when the world itself does." Daenir clasped his arm. "Then may that day come soon, for both our sakes." With a nod, Gandalf turned Shadowfax's head toward the open road. The morning sun struck his staff, and for a moment it shone as though a star had kindled there. The people watched in silence as he rode away, the grey figure dwindling into the golden light. And far above, unseen, the clouds gathered once more, a faint spiral upon the sky, pale and slow, like the first breath of a storm reborn. Gandalf glanced upward, his eyes bright beneath his hood. "So you follow still," he said softly. "Then let us see who tires first." He urged Shadowfax onward, and the land swallowed them both, one grey figure moving west, and above him the faint whisper of wings upon the wind. The road from Dale wound long and lonely across the vales of the river running. Spring had come in earnest now. The snows had melted from the lowlands, and the air was rich with the scent of thawed earth. Yet Gandalf rode in silence, and though the sunlight gleamed bright upon the fields, his thoughts were heavy. Behind him lay the safety of stone walls and mountain halls, but before him stretched the wide world, filled with whispers of the storm that still gathered beyond sight. He could feel it in the wind, the faint chill that lingered even in warm days, the distant thunder that rolled where no clouds stood. For a week he followed the river westward. Villages dotted the banks, small clusters of homes where men worked the soil and sang old songs of the north. They hailed the grey wanderer kindly, for his name was known in every corner of Middle-earth, and his presence brought both wonder and unease. Children ran to the road to glimpse him, and the old bowed their heads, as though sensing in him a power older than their lineages. He smiled at them, gentle and weary, but tarried nowhere. The world had grown too still, and stillness, he knew, was never a sign of peace for long. On the 10th day, he came to the valley of the greenwood's western edge, where the trees grew thinner and the land began to rise. The path ahead led toward the high pass, the ancient road that would take him again across the misty mountains. Here the sky was clear and sharp, and the peaks glimmered like silver teeth in the sunlight. That evening he made camp beside a shallow pool, its surface still as glass. He ate little, smoked less, and sat long watching the stars come out one by one. The night was quiet, save for the sigh of the wind and the crackle of the fire. Then faintly he heard it, a sound like wings. He lifted his head, his eyes narrowing. Across the dark sky, a shape passed, swift and silent, vast as a cloud, but darker. It did not cry out nor circle. It moved straight and sure, heading westward toward the mountains. Gandalf rose, his staff gleaming faintly. "So the hunt continues," he murmured. "You seek the west, do you? Then you shall not go alone." At dawn he rode hard for the mountains. The path wound steep and narrow, the wind biting at his cloak. The air grew colder as he climbed, and snow glittered in the shadows of the cliffs. Twice he glimpsed the dark shape again, gliding between the peaks, always ahead of him, never near. By noon of the 2nd day, he reached the summit of the pass. There, upon a narrow ledge overlooking the vast lands of Eriador, he halted and looked down. The world spread beneath him like a map, the silver ribbon of the Bruinen winding through green valleys, the faint haze of forests, and far off, beyond sight, the shimmer of the sea. And above it all, the shadow hung. It moved slowly now, circling high in the blue, its form half hidden by sunlight. Even from that distance he could feel the cold of it, a pressure upon his heart, a silence that swallowed the sound of wind. Gandalf raised his staff, and light burst from its tip, pure and white. The shadow recoiled, its wings flaring wide. For an instant he saw it clearly, not flesh, not mist, but something between. A vast form woven of smoke and ice, its eyes two pale flames burning with hatred. "Begone!" cried Gandalf, his voice echoing through the peaks. "Your master's chain is broken, and your time in this world is ended." The creature shrieked, a sound that tore through stone and air alike. The mountains answered with thunder. It stooped low, diving toward him, and the wind screamed in its wake. Gandalf stood firm, his cloak whipping like storm banners. He thrust his staff high, and from it leapt a column of fire. The two powers met in a blinding flash. For a heartbeat, the world was white. The mountain shook, stones shattering, and snow sliding from the heights. When the light faded, the shadow was gone. Only a whisper of frost drifted upon the wind. Gandalf leaned heavily upon his staff, his breath clouding the air. "So ends the last of your wings," he said softly. But even as he spoke, he knew it was not so simple. The spirit had fled, not perished. Such things were not slain by fire alone. They returned to their master, broken but not destroyed. He gazed westward toward the lands beyond the mountains and thought of Elrond's words. The east is wild and wide, and few among the wise dare its shadow. He had faced that shadow now, and though his strength had held, he felt its weight upon his spirit like ice upon the soul. He descended the pass slowly, for the storm that had struck the peaks had loosed avalanches upon the lower slopes. The air grew warmer as he went, and by evening he had reached the valley of the Bruinen. Rivendell lay ahead, hidden among the cliffs, its lights flickering like stars. The sound of the river reached his ears, the same river that had sung him westward in years long past, when other wars had yet to come. When he entered the valley, the elves greeted him with quiet reverence. They saw the weariness in his eyes and led him at once to Elrond's hall. The Lord of Rivendell stood waiting beside the hearth, his face grave but kind. "You have walked in dark places again, Mithrandir," Elrond said, "and the shadow follows you still." Gandalf set his staff beside the fire. "It follows all of us, Elrond. I have seen the shape of the storm that comes. The wings that haunted the north are broken, yet their master stirs. He lies beyond the sea of Rhûn, but his reach grows. If he wakes in full, the world will tremble again." Elrond bowed his head. "So it begins anew," he murmured. "The age turns and the light wanes." "Not yet," Gandalf said firmly. "While there are hearts that still stand, the light cannot fail. But we must be ready. The free peoples must watch and guard their borders. For if the frost returns, it will not come as it did before. It will come quiet as breath, and by the time we hear it, it may be too late." Elrond looked into the fire, his eyes distant. "I will send word to the Havens and to Lothlorien. The eyes of the wise will turn eastward once more." "Good," Gandalf said. "Let them be watchful. For the shadow I faced is not a mere ghost. It remembers. It hates. And hatred, when it sleeps, dreams of wings." For a long while they stood in silence. The fire crackled softly, and outside the river sang its endless song. At last, Gandalf took a seat by the hearth. He drew his pipe and lit it, sending a thin plume of smoke curling toward the rafters. "It seems," he said with a faint smile, "that my journey is not yet ended. The north has quieted, but the wind from the east carries more than snow." Elrond smiled in return, though his eyes remained troubled. "You are ever the wanderer, my friend. Perhaps that is the fate of those who bear the world's burdens. They never rest long in one place." "Perhaps," Gandalf said, "but one must still find time for good company, fine fire, and a pipe well filled." The elf lord laughed softly, and the heaviness in the room eased for a moment. The night deepened beyond the windows, and the stars shone bright over Rivendell. Yet far to the east, beyond the mountains and the silent plains, a thin veil of cloud rose upon the horizon. Within it flickered a faint blue light, like a heart that had not yet ceased to beat. And though the west slept in peace, the storm had only drawn breath. The halls of Rivendell lay deep in quiet that night. But Gandalf did not sleep. The great fire upon the hearth burned low, casting long shadows across the carved stone floor. Outside, the river sang softly, a voice of peace amid the deep unease that still clung to his heart. He sat upon the balcony overlooking the valley, pipe in hand, watching as the moon rode high above the peaks. The air was clear and cold, scented with pine and water. All was calm, and yet he could not shake the feeling that the calm itself was watching him, like an eye waiting to blink. The east would not rest. He knew it as surely as he knew the path of the stars. The thing he had seen beyond the Sea of Rune was no mere ghost. It was a will, fragmented, yes, but cunning, patient. Such powers did not fade easily. They lingered in the forgotten corners of the world, feeding upon memory and fear. Soft footsteps broke his thoughts. He turned and saw a figure approach, Aragorn, son of Arathorn, tall and grave, his grey eyes keen as the morning. He bowed slightly. "I did not expect to find you wakeful, Mithrandir," he said. "Though perhaps I should have known. The wise seldom rest easily when the wind turns." Gandalf smiled faintly. "And you, my friend? Should not the heir of Isildur take his ease beneath the roof of his foster father?" Aragorn came to stand beside him, looking out upon the silvered valley. "Sleep eludes me also. I feel it, the change in the air. The wind smells of snow, though spring is come. There are whispers among the ranges, of strange lights seen beyond the eastern marches, and beasts moving under shadow. You have been there, have you not?" "I have," said Gandalf, "and what I found was worse than whispers. A spirit of the elder days, bound in frost and wrath. It was called forth by a hand that even I cannot yet name." Aragorn's gaze darkened. "Then war brews once more." "Perhaps not war," Gandalf replied. "Not yet. But the storm gathers and its wings are wide. The north may know peace for a season, but the east does not sleep. Shadows stir where Sauron's dominion once reached, and not all who served him have vanished." The man was silent a moment, his eyes far away. "When I rode the wilds beyond the Etten moors," he said, "I came upon ruins, the kind no law remembers. There were carvings upon the stones, strange and sharp, like marks of ice. I felt then as though unseen eyes watched from the air. I told myself it was folly. Yet now—" "It was no folly," Gandalf said softly. "Those ruins are the bones of the winged host, the servants of the North's last great evil. The mark you saw is its echo. I thought that doom ended, but it seems it lingers still, waiting for the hand that will lift it again." Aragorn turned sharply. "And this hand, you think it moves now?" The wizard sighed. "Aye. I felt it in the ruins of the east. The voice that called the drake was not dead. I struck at its form, not its heart. It will gather itself anew, as all malice does." They stood together in silence for a time. The valley lay still beneath the moon, and the stars burned like cold fire above. Then Gandalf said, "When the day comes, Aragorn, you must be ready. The darkness that rises will not announce itself with armies or banners. It will come through the hearts of men, through fear, pride, and despair. Guard against these, for they are the roots of the shadow." "I will remember," said Aragorn quietly. "But what of you? Will you go east again?" "Not yet," Gandalf answered. "There is still much to be done here." I must speak with the elves, the dwarves, and with the stewards of Gondor. The storm's breath touches every realm now, and when the time comes, I will go where the wind commands." A faint smile crossed Aragorn's lips. "Then I shall keep watch in the north, as my fathers did. If darkness crosses the mountains, it will find the Dunedain waiting." "Good," said Gandalf, his eyes gleaming. "You are a flame that neither frost nor shadow shall quench." When Aragorn had gone, Gandalf remained upon the balcony until the first light of dawn crept over the peaks. The valley glowed golden, and the song of birds rose anew. Yet even as the world woke, he felt no peace. In the heart of the sunrise, he saw again the memory of that blue fire, cold, coiling, patient. He turned from the view and went down into the lower halls, where Elrond awaited him in quiet council. Maps lay spread upon the long table, the Northlands, the Sea of Rhûn, and the lands beyond. Upon one corner lay the fragment of crystal he had taken from the ruins, a small shard that glimmered faintly, still touched with the light of the Pale One's heart. Elrond looked up as he entered. "It stirs still." "It does," Gandalf said grimly. "I have kept it sealed in light, but the flame within it will not fade. It waits for the voice that called it forth." "Then the power that made it yet lives." "Yes," said Gandalf, "and though its reach is long, it has not yet found its strength. We have time, but little." Elrond's face grew grave. "Then the world turns once more toward its testing. Few now remain who remember the wars of the elder days. The younger kindreds grow complacent. They will not believe until the shadow is upon them." "Then we must remind them," Gandalf said. "I will go to the south, to the stewards of Gondor. They must keep their watch upon Mordor's borders. The east is waking again, and I fear its servants will not be content to sleep." Elrond nodded. "Go then, Mithrandir. You have walked paths no other dares tread. But when the storm breaks, return if you may. The valley of Rivendell will stand, even as the world trembles." Gandalf clasped the Elf Lord's hand. "And may it stand long after even I am gone." Before noon, Shadowfax was saddled and ready. The river sang below as the wizard mounted. He looked back once toward the shining towers of Imladris, their roofs gleaming in the sun. Then he turned southward. The road ahead led through fair valleys and green hills, but beyond them loomed the darker lands, the plains that stretched toward Gondor's borders, and beyond those, the broken realm of Mordor. Somewhere far beyond even that horizon, the faint echo of the storm still called, its voice hidden in the heart of the world. He rode without haste, yet with purpose. Farmers in the fields waved to him as he passed, unaware of the burden he carried or the shadow that rode unseen beside him. To them, he was but a kindly wanderer, a grey old man upon a great white horse. And perhaps it was better so. The world needed its peace, while it could still draw breath. That night, as he made camp beneath an old oak upon the plains, Gandalf looked once more to the east. There, at the edge of sight, the horizon shimmered faintly, a pale band like distant lightning. He frowned, then smiled wryly. "So," he said to the darkness, "we are not yet done with one another. Very well. Let the wind blow and the wings beat. I have chased worse storms than you." He lay down then, the stars wheeling above him, and his hand rested lightly upon his staff. The night was still, the fire warm, and for a time he closed his eyes in peace. But far away, beyond all maps and mortal reach, a pale light flickered once more over the Sea of Rhûn, like a wound that refused to heal, and the wind carried upon it a whisper, faint as breath upon glass, It said only his name, Gandalf. He stirred, but did not wake. The storm was not over. It was only waiting for its hour. And when that hour came, the Grey Wanderer would rise again. Thus ends Gandalf, Wings over the North.